Before I pass the platform to the speakers, what I'll do is I'll quickly go through some of the basics of ERC grants. What we did is in the past, I remember in 15th of September, we did organize a webinar particularly for ERC related grants. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen and I'll just present a few, 2 or 3 slides before I pass it on to our speakers. I believe you can see my screen now. What I'll just do is, so just to give you a very brief idea, as we have already discussed, ERC is a part of Horizon 2020. Horizon 2020 is the EU's R&I framework program, which started in 2014 and will end in 2020. The next EU framework program is called Horizon Europe. Right. So at the moment, what we are looking at is under Horizon 2020, ERC, out of the 80 billion euros that was for Horizon 2020, ERC had a budget of 13 billion euros for the period of 7 years. And with that, it brought so many opportunities for frontier research. What it entails is these ERC related grants are like long-term grants, which are very specific to individual researchers and are open for researchers of any nationality. And you can see that these are very specifically oriented towards high risk and high gain, and is a pioneering sort of research funding program. What is more interesting is there is something that is available for all stages of the researchers. What I'll point out is there are 4 particular ERC funding schemes that you should have in mind. The first one is called the starting grant. And these are for those who have had experience of 2 to 7 years since the completion of their PhD. It is worth up to 1.5 million euros plus 1 million euro if you are, for instance, trying to buy large equipments, or if you have to have startup costs when you are migrating to Europe. So this is a total of 2.5 million and a duration of 5 years. This is the starting grant. This is the most basic level of ERC funding. Then we move on to a slightly higher experience limit, which is 7 to 12 years of experience since the completion of PhD. And these are called Consolidator grants. And it's particularly for up to 2 million euros plus up to 1 million euro, again, for the purchase of, for instance, large machineries, equipments that you might need in the process. We will hear more on Consolidator specifically because we have one of the grantee with us, Professor Keys, who will be explaining his experience and will give us first-hand advice on how to go forward with Consolidated grant. Then further up, we have the advanced grant. These are for those who have had excellent scientific track record of recognized achievement in the last 10 years. And these are also, again, for a duration of 5 years and with a funding of up to 2.5 million euros plus 1.1 million euro. The last of the ERC funding scheme, which is of relevance to all the researchers in Australia and New Zealand, is the Synergy grant. These are the largest grants that ERC provides, with 10 million plus a top-up of 4 million euros and up to 6 years duration. What is more interesting is in 2019 work program, for the first time, what happened is ERC introduced this concept that one researchers can be based outside European Union or the associated countries. Mind you, the starting grant, consolidated grant, and advanced grant are for individual researchers. Synergy grants, however, are for 2 to 4 principal investigators to come together and solve particular issues that they foresee to have synergistic approach towards. So these are synergy grants. Of course, we will hear more on these, but it's just to bring you up to a basic level of understanding about ERC project. And last thing that you need to also understand is what are opportunities for non-ERA researchers, which is for researchers, for instance, in Australia and New Zealand, is there would be also additional startup funding for researchers moving to Europe, which I already mentioned. And these grantees can keep their affiliation with home institutions when they're outside. Significant part, of course, has to be, at least for instance, 50% in Europe, and the team members that they employ within their projects can be outside Europe. With that, I think we have a fair understanding of what these ERC grants are. And now what I'll do is I'll quickly move on to our first speaker for today. And I'll like to introduce to you again, Professor Catherine, who has been an ERC evaluator and is currently the staff scientist at University of Beirut. Over to you, Professor Catherine.
Okay, thank you very much. And a special thank you for inviting me to share my knowledge and experience to all of you for the ERC evaluation process. And just a bit of background as to what my perspective is. So I've served the ERC in various capacities now for 8 years. And I've been a panel member on 3 starting grant panels. And this year I was chair of the starting grant panel. I've also been a shadow panel member for Consolidator and advanced grants. And, you know, over these 8 years, I've reviewed hundreds of proposals. So what I want to do here is pass on some of my experience. I will say that my involvement with ERC has been exclusively in panel PE10. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the panels are divided into 3 different domains. So there's life sciences, there's social sciences and humanities, and then there's physical sciences and engineering. And I have been in panel 10 of the physical sciences and engineering. Now, PE10 is called Earth Systems Science, and it covers just about everything in geoscience. So from atmosphere to earthquakes to oceanography, and we even have planetary geology within our domain. So I want to keep my presentation at a fairly high level so that it's really speaking to everybody in any domain who might be thinking of applying. And in fact, I'm guessing that a lot of people looking at this, who are watching this, are potential applicants. And so that's really the audience that I'm speaking to. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So, because my slides are really talking points for the rest of what I want to say. So really the first thing when you're thinking about, is it appropriate that you apply for one of these ERC grants, is it a good fit? Because proposals that are funded, they're aligned with the ERC's mission. And I've put their mission statement down here, that it's to encourage the highest quality research in Europe through competitive funding and to support investigator-driven frontier research across all fields on the basis of scientific excellence. So really the sole criterion by which all proposals are evaluated by is scientific excellence. And we can describe this as it's bottom up, it's curiosity driven, and it takes place in an open competition. And one thing that you want to be aware of is that the type of research that's funded within these ERC programs it can be quite different from what type of research is funded by other funding organizations. There's a lot of valuable research that fits elsewhere, okay? And some examples of research that's not a good fit with what the ERC is offering is, for example, top-down research, where you're amassing a body of knowledge for future analysis, that you're going from the top and then going down in terms of breaking it up into its smaller components to try to form the picture of the science that's happening. That is not what is meant within these ERC programs. Also, what is not funded are proof of concept proposals, where it's just the first step in laying the foundation for a future research field. And ERC also doesn't fund research that's just at the state of the art. It's really looking to fund research that advances the state of the art. So there's a lot of useful information out there, and one of the best places to start is the ERC website. That, I would say, is mandatory reading before you really get started. So documents like the work program, you have to read through the work program. You need to know what's in there. And you know, the work program even includes the questions that the panel members and reviewers are asked in the course of their review. And I'll say a bit more about that in a bit. There's a document, Information for Applicants, Guide for Peer Reviewers. I just had a look at it last night. It's really easy to navigate the website. So really that's your first stop in terms of getting information. But also look to see what sort of projects have been funded. You know, what does a successful project look like? The ERC website also has news and information about funded projects. You can go to more non-conventional sources, like there's ERC comics, just all written together. Check those out. It's really graphic stories of funded projects, and it lets you see a bit behind the scenes in terms of the thinking about it. Or Science Squared, that's another source of information about that gives more the creative side of these funded projects. You know, follow the ERC on social media, whatever your favorite mode is. And I would also encourage using local resources. So, for example, if your institution has a research office, even if they're not specific to the ERC, they can be very helpful in terms of how to go about putting together successful proposals and so on. And I would say at this point, don't wait until just a month before the deadline. This is really the work that you need to start a long time before to give you the opportunity to refine your ideas, to get feedback, and to aim towards what does a successful proposal look like. So let's talk about the project, because the evaluation process has two parts. Half of the evaluation is based on the project, and the other half is based on the PI. And both have to reach the standards of excellence that the ERC is looking for. And again, this is all laid out in the work program in terms of what does an excellent project look like. So a good project, it needs to have a good idea at its core. Without that good idea, then you really don't have a meaningful project. But it's not just the good idea, but you need a presentation that convinces the panel and the reviewers about what it is that you have in mind. So when you're putting together your project, keep in mind that you are speaking to quite a broad audience. So as you'll find when you look closer at the documents, there are 2 steps to the application process. In step 1, there's the part B1 is going to be evaluated by a very wide range of scientists. And so, for example, the panels, they cover a large range of scientific disciplines within that umbrella. So within Earth system science, for example, I go into the lab and I do high pressure experiments to figure out what's happening to the stuff that's beneath our feet and how it causes what we see on the surface, like earthquakes and so on. But I've been evaluating projects on oceanography or air pollution or methane production by livestock. So that means that you have to make your ideas clear that avoids jargon and that avoids prior knowledge that you don't really lay out in your proposal. Now at step 2, and this is part B2 of your proposal that will be evaluated, this is where expert reviewers are brought in, so also from outside the panel. So these are people who are in your field, and they will be really evaluating the feasibility and the meaningfulness of what you are proposing. But also keep in mind that the decisions are made by the entire panel. So the entire panel will be making the decision on your proposal, even at step 2. So an oceanographer is going to be making an evaluation of a proposal that maybe has some impact on how the ozone layer is being examined and what future prospects are there. Okay, so now going more into more detail of the proposal, the project description, you have to make it clear what are the research questions that you are trying to answer. Okay, these are bottom-up. This is bottom-up research, so you need hypotheses that you're testing. And actually, a lot of proposals fail on this point because they don't have testable hypotheses. So that's an important part of the description of your proposal. How will your research project advance the research field? Make it clear, what do you want to do, how you're going to do it, and why is it important that you're doing this? And later on in the proposal, we're still talking about the B1 part, where you're really just giving, this is the first step of the evaluation process. You're asking for resources, you're asking for manpower, probably equipment, and you need to make it clear, how are these going to support what you have in mind? Make sure it's PI driven, okay? You need to be seen to be in the driver's seat. You can certainly bring in collaborators to cover areas of expertise that may be important to your project, but that you don't have in your arsenal. But make sure that it's clear that you are the one who is driving the project. And just in the nuts and bolts of how you write the proposal, make it concise, make it readily understandable, It should be easy to navigate so that a reviewer can go back and forth and figure out, oh, okay, they want these resources, and then go back. This is their research question. So it needs to be well organized without large blocks of text that make it more difficult. Graphic illustrations help a lot. Pictures worth 1,000 words. So this is all part of the project description. And as I mentioned, in the work program, the actual questions that the reviewers and the panel members have to answer in preparing their report, they're given there. And it's not a free-form report that they write. They're really speaking directly to these questions, so you can look them up. And so, for example, they're similar for all of them, but I'm speaking specifically for starting grants. So, to what extent does the proposed research address important challenges? So, it's to your advantage to spell out those important challenges that you're addressing. You have to demonstrate the groundbreaking nature of your proposed work. You have to show what is the impact that it's going to have. And keep in mind that these challenges can be discipline specific. So you're the one who knows your own discipline. So keep that in mind to spell that out very, very clearly in your description. The reviewers are also asked to answer the question, to what extent are the objectives ambitious and beyond the state of the art? Innovation, novelty. This is something that is an important component of ERC funded projects. To what extent is the proposed research high risk, high gain? As said earlier, this is frontier research with a potential for a high payoff. And there have to be risks, otherwise it would have been done before. But keep in mind, you should write about how you're going to mitigate these risks. Another question that's asked is, to what extent is the outlined scientific approach feasible? Okay, it needs to be broadly feasible. It's not going to be successful if you have this outrageous idea that, wow, yeah, it's high risk, but there's no possibility that it's going to succeed because of some fatal flaws. So make sure that it's well aligned with your own background and your skills. And consider what the evaluators are seeing when they read your proposal. So they need to see the pertinent information that's going to help them assess this feasibility, in fact, all these questions. And so the last topic that I want to cover here is the principal investigator, because as I mentioned, this is also half of the evaluation process. So the principal investigator also has to reach the appropriate level of excellence. And so in this part of the proposal, you're asked to put in a CV. There's very specific categories, and to have a track record. So the CV part are just basically lists, but the track record, you really can explain things without just giving lists. And I would really recommend that you do that, because the evaluators need to understand that you are the right person for this particular proposal without being told that specifically in words. You have to demonstrate by your descriptions of what your achievements have been and so on. So you want to show how your past experience is going to lay the foundation for the success of your proposed work. You're not going to get funded if it's not well aligned what you want to do with your prior experience. And again, It can be discipline specific. You know, what's important in your discipline? Is it important to have a lot of papers, or is it important to have a very strong teaching record, or a lot of outreach activities? I mean, this is again something that you know best about your discipline, about what is important. And please don't oversell your accomplishments. The panel members are not going to be just blinded by statements that you are the greatest geochemist or whatever it happens to be. You really have to spell out the achievements that have led to this, the high level of excellence. So in other words, show, don't tell. And the questions that are asked for the reviewers with regard to PI, because again, there are very specific questions, are: to what extent has the PI demonstrated the ability to conduct groundbreaking research? So yeah, write in your track record what groundbreaking research you have conducted. Don't leave it to the reviewers to try to glean it just from the titles or the fact that you've published in high impact papers. You really have to spell it out. Why is this groundbreaking research? Another question: to what extent does the PI provide evidence of creative independent thinking? So for starting grant in particular, you need to demonstrate that you have independent work from your PhD supervisor, that you've already established yourself as an independent researcher. And finally, to what extent does the PI have the required scientific expertise and capacity? And so, yeah, as I explained before, you need to convince the panel that you do have the experience in order to do this. And so that's the end of my presentation. And I will allow questions, or we go on to the next speaker, as you wish.
Thank you very much, Professor Catherine. I think for all the attendees, it was really insightful to see what really questions do evaluators see, and it's very good to hear on advices. I can see that we have questions coming in, but I'd request all of you to keep on asking questions. We'll come back to them after Professor Keys presents his part of the presentation. So I'll now hand over the platform to Professor David Keys, who is also a recipient of the Consolidator grant in 2018 and is currently the group leader at Institute of Molecular Pathology. Over to you, Professor Keys.
Hi everyone, my name's David Keys. I'm an Australian, and I'm just going to begin by telling you a little bit about myself and then my experience with the ERC, which I have to say has been really an amazing one. I grew up in Queensland. I studied science and law at the University of Queensland, where I did neuroscience and genetics. And then I went on to Melbourne, where I did my honours in molecular neuroscience before a PhD in Oxford. And then I started my lab shortly after my doctorate at the IMP in Vienna. And it was at this time when I moved from Oxford to Vienna, I started a rather esoteric project, which is essentially focused on how animals detect magnetic fields. And we tackle this problem from a kind of a molecular, physiological, and anatomical question. And as you can see here, we use pigeons as a model system. And this work has very generously been supported by the ERC, both a starting grant and a Consolidator grant. So I'd like to begin by simply posing the question, well, why apply for an ERC grant? And I think the real attraction from my perspective is that they love to support high risk, high reward science. And that's exactly what I like to do. And there are a lot of funding agencies, for instance, in Australia and New Zealand, that would just not support something as crazy as how pigeons detect magnetic fields. Secondly, the money's really good, right? So in the case of a Consolidator, it's 2 million. We've just heard 1.5 million for starting grant, not including money for equipment. And the timing is, you've got 5 years, so you can actually do something meaningful for a period of 5 years, where those first 2 years, may not be so productive, and you can really kind of try and build a piece of research that's has real value and meaning, rather than having to scurry around and apply for another grant. They're also very flexible, so as you've heard, there's capacity to have people outside the EU, but also within the EU, you can really move your grant anywhere. And finally, it really does raise the profile of your work. So when you get an ERC grant, suddenly people think, well, maybe he's not so crazy after all, or maybe this is actually something worth doing. So how do you go about applying for an ERC grant? Well, the easiest thing, of course, is you need an idea, a question, or a concept, and I'm sure you guys all have these already. You need a host organization, and again, this is very easy. This is just the university, or in my case, at the IMP, an independent research institute that hosts the organization. And pretty much any organization will be super eager to host you, because they get overheads as a consequence of an ERC grant, and they just undertake to support you during that period of time. You have to write the grant, and as you've heard, it consists of 2 parts, and you have to select a panel, and there are 25 panels. In my case, I think it was neurosciences LS5, so you just need to select a panel. So that's all I have to say. The concept, getting a host, selecting a panel is all pretty easy. The more challenging parts are then to write the application. And as you've heard, there are 2 parts of the application. There's B1 and B2. The first part is just 5 pages, which is really kind of the core message and the nuts and bolts of your proposal. And then part B2 is about 15 pages. And if you pass the first part, then the reviewers will assess part B2. I think it's really critical that you articulate clear aims in your proposal, both in part B1 and part B2. Both of the ERC grants that I've written, I've had 3 aims, which have had a very clear hypothesis, as Catherine has just indicated. I think you absolutely have to couch what you do in terms of hypothesis-driven research, a question, and how you will test that hypothesis. In line with the ethos of the ERC, it has to be ambitious, right? You have to go beyond predictable and do something that will really drive a field forward. I think they're really not a great place to apply if what you have in mind is something just a continuation of an existing research program. While being ambitious, as Catherine indicated, you have to show it's feasible, and the best way to do this is to, for each of your aims, have preliminary data which indicates that you're able to perform the experiments indicated. Another really critical component of an ERC grant, I think, is to have contingency plans to demonstrate that you have thought about what you will do if it doesn't work. We all know science doesn't work, rarely works. So how are you going to address this? What will you do? I've also reviewed a number of ERC grants. I think in the written application, there are just no excuses for errors. Like, you can't have random figures thrown in. You can't have spelling mistakes, unfinished sentences. It really does need to be extremely high quality. It's highly competitive. And if you've slapped something together at the last minute, you're wasting everybody's time, including someone who reviews it. And you should be aware of the deadline. So these are very strict. They relate to the time at which you finished your PhD. And these are then really critical in terms of when you apply. And I think you want to think about this very carefully. So whether you're a starter or a consolidator, that you absolutely, adhere to those time limits. Obviously, if you're a bit more mature, it's better to apply later in the starting grant time zone, because you can kind of build up more papers and perhaps a stronger proposal. Now, And yes, so this takes about 6 months to write the application. So this is not something you can throw together in the last minute. Now, if you are successful and you pass the first stage and you then get selected for an interview, you then get invited to Brussels. And now I've been to Brussels twice for ERC interviews, and I have to tell you that I have a somewhat aversive reaction to Brussels as a city as a consequence, because it's really a very, very anxiogenic, high stress environment. And the first very practical piece of advice I would like to give you is you need to book your flights early. You need to find a nice hotel, because when there are ERC interviews, you know, the entire European scientific community descends on Brussels, and it's impossible to get a flight or a hotel room if you book late. You will be assessed by a panel of 20 experts in your field. And these are all highly qualified individuals, and it is incredibly intimidating to walk into a room with 20 people. You can look at the previous panels. These are published by the ERC, so you get some idea as to who will be on the panel and what their background is, and that may inform you as to what kind of inquest questions you might expect. You are required to give a 10-minute presentation, and again, if this is a Consolidator grant, that's 2 million euros for 10 minutes. So it's about 200,000 euros a minute. You literally walk into the room and the chair says, go. You are given 10 minutes exactly, and then you hear the word stop, and then you have to stop exactly then. You are then subject to 15 minutes of questions, and you get all kinds of questions. You get questions from the reviewer, you get questions from the panel, and you know, I got questions that I just would never have predicted, I have to say. So I really don't think you can practice this interview enough. So to give you some idea, for my Consolidator, I did about 20 practice runs. I got every single person I knew into that room, and I asked them to ask me any question that came to their mind. Because I think obviously those questions are really critical in your assessment. If you've heard the question before, you're better equipped to answer it. And you know, this I learned from the starting interview, where someone asked me a question that I just had no idea about, and so I was, I think, better prepared for the Consolidator. But again, you really have to practice this. You have 10 minutes. It has to be absolutely spot on, and you really should prepare for questions that you just do not expect. It is a very, very stressful experience. I do not know of any ERC applicant who has not found it a stressful experience. You know, I think there are a number of ways that you need to be prepared for this. Perhaps one of the most stressful parts is when you arrive in Brussels, you are told to be in a room, and you turn up roughly an hour to 2 hours before your interview, and you are there in a room with maybe 10 other people who are being interviewed, and all of you are waiting there in the kind of in a state of heightened tension, let's say, and then you are called out and have to then give your interview. So I think you should be prepared for this. You know, my coping strategy was that I just listened to Paul Kelly, which I find very relaxing, and then kind of that put me into a mindset where I felt that I could then perform my best in that interview process. In the actual interview, I think, again, it's very short. You have to answer questions in a precise and clear manner. I think you will be challenged, but you do not want to start an argument with a panel member. I think this generally doesn't reflect very well on an applicant if you start an argument. So I would avoid that. but you know, you need to balance between being assertive, getting your point across without provoking an argument. And similarly, I would strongly suggest to you that if you do not know the answer to a question, do not pretend that you do, because again, you are in a room with 20 people who are very well informed, and they will let you know if you're full of crap. When you have the ERC grant, one of the benefits is that there are many reviews. Your grant has been assessed by a large number of people. I found these reviews, which you then receive, to be highly informative. And reflecting on those in terms of directing my research program, I really benefited from. It's a great opportunity to hire good people. You're now an ERC grantee. That again carries weight and puts you in a better position to hire really talented students and postdocs. European academic institutions have a love affair with ERC grantees. There's a competition amongst academic institutions to recruit ERC grantees. So I think it's a great opportunity if you are a recipient to leverage promotion and academic positions. You know, I think this is a really effective way of getting a tenured position or a tenure track position. ERC grantees are routinely subject to audit. These are not too painful, but you should be prepared for this. So you will be asked as to, you know, why you purchase, you know, these particular reagents, and this is, you know, pretty standard. The other thing that being a starting or a consolidated grantee then allows you to do is to access another pot of money, which are the proof of concept grants. So these are around $500,000, I may be wrong, and you can only apply for that money if you're an ERC grantee. And so, and the success rate of these is actually pretty good. So that again allows you to leverage your ERC grant to raise more money. And then of course, when you have an ERC grant, you're automatically then confronted with the question is, how do you get the next one? And I think, you know, I really benefited from that because it compels you to have a vision for what you want to do in 5 years' time and where you want to be. You know, I think that's a real benefit from having this kind of money. And if you want to know about my lab, you can go to our website, keyslab.org, or drop me an email if you have any questions. And that's the end of my talk.
I'm very thankful to both our finalists for their insightful comments and insightful knowledge that they have shared. It has really been a great pleasure for all of us here in Australia and New Zealand to hear from you on the ERC grant and a perspective of evaluator and a grantee. With that being said, I'll see you again tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Australian time, that is 6:30 p.m. New Zealand for day 3, which is the last day of the European Research Days. With that, signing off for today. Thank you very much for joining in. Goodbye.
Thank you.